John, you want to take a first crack? What's the state of the Hollywood-China relationship today? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Are we in a steady state situation?
Thank you. First, I want to acknowledge Starlight, who's also a investor along with us in Crazy Rich Asians. Don't get enough credit for that, so thank you. So I think it's been interesting over at least the 7 years I've been involved to see the peaks and valleys between, or at least the descriptions of the peaks and valleys between the relationship. And I don't really focus on that as much. I don't look at the downtime or the uptime. It just looks, there's a continuum, and you got to look at it over many, many years before you draw those kind of immediate conclusions. Now it's, well, box office is down in China, and that's going to signal something. The U.S. industry has taken many, many, many turns over many, many years. I think you're just seeing a similar market reaction in China. For our purposes, we continue to see it as a great opportunity to reach more audiences, make more money, educate additional audiences to material that's appropriate for both countries. So I see it as positive as ever. So I try not to get caught in, that momentary blip where, oh God, it's tougher now. It's just, that's the nature of the work. So I remain very kind of positive and bullish, and know that the hard work is just going to continue.
So you're bullish and taking a long-term view. Alexis, are you as much of a bull?
Yep. Yeah, and I would echo that, and I would say that part of what we can look back at the last couple years and use to support that argument is that we need to have corrections in a market for that long-term sustainability to be there. And I think several of the times in the last couple years where the noise escalated about a concern over being able to make deals in between Hollywood and China had to do with coming out of times where you might say Hollywood was taking advantage of certain kinds of deals that didn't feel right, didn't feel like they were at the right valuations, didn't feel like they were sustainable. Those kinds of corrections are necessary if we're going to have a long-term relationship and have a relationship that feels like it works for both sides.
All right, we got two bulls here on the left. You run with the bulls too, Bennett?
I was in Pamplona the other day, and that sure hurt. No, seriously though, long term, yes, but I think right now there's a lot of issues that impact the ability, I think, to do like a day-to-day business. And in fact, it was probably, I don't know if it was April or June, no, it was June. And I was sitting with Rong Chen having breakfast in Beijing. And he told me, because at that time, all the stories were really about tax issues, celebrities. And he told me, hey, Bennett, you're looking at the wrong story. And the real story is the economic underpinnings. So started taking a look at the China capital markets, and they've pretty much, for right now, left the entertainment space. Now, I think overall the stock market for most companies in China, the Shanghai and Shenzhen exchanges are down. Actually, now I sound like a real banker. This is freaking me out a little bit.
We'll correct that soon.
Yeah. But that's a big story that's not really being talked about. So I think if you look at all the, kind of big factors, right, and then what counterbalances that. So I think number one, a couple years ago, there were some currency capital issues in terms of flight of RMB and the corrections that were made there. The second was the exuberance of Billy Mumphrey, the exuberance of some investors coming out of China who were buying European soccer teams or European football teams, or maybe the non-studio studios and paying too much. And that also had a negative impact on the good players, right? Mm-hmm. So there's extra scrutiny if you're doing M&A in the entertainment industry offshore. And then the biggest thing to me is also the political issues. And you look at, the leaders of our countries are not really getting along, and that has a big impact. I guess people call it a trade war. Well, we're not winning. I don't think anybody wins, so all the people lose in that regard. So that's the negative. I think on the positive side, there's amazing people, I think, doing great things, especially as trailblazers. And for our business, we do a lot of work locally. We do a lot of local movies, actually more so satellite TV programming, web series in China. And here, there's a lot of what we call the inbound businesses of companies like Perfect World, investing with Universal. And for today, for companies to do that, you really have to have assets already offshore. But I think he can probably talk more than I can about that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, no, that's we're setting them up here. Rong, you want to take that on now, or you want to take a breath?
Thank you.
You're ready to go. Rong is ready to go. Okay.
Yeah, well, but I'm not going to talk about our asset offshores.
It's a hell of an asset, I'll tell you that.
I don't publicly talk about this too much, but for years and years, I hold the view that what's happening in the past is a little too fast. From small things about a movie, that a couple of people talk about a movie in a coffee shop in Beijing, to the point the movie is released, sometimes takes a year and a half. That's too fast. To companies that are just set up yesterday and want to go IPO in China in 2 years or 3 years, that's too fast. To companies here, suddenly will go to China and raise $1 billion, that's too fast. So on the way over here, I'm thinking this is a little like people driving 80 miles per hour in a parking lot. And then if there's a speed bump, it's not the speed bump's fault. Right? So you're driving too fast. You should slow down. For the speed bump to be put in there, even though it wasn't there, it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. So what's happening in China, in the film industry, as well as between Hollywood and China, I think is healthier than ever. We need to slow down. We need to get the right people driving the right car safely in a parking lot or in a public school zone. That's what I think.
Well said.
So I take that to say that the relationship may be slower but healthier.
Yes, selectively. You can't just... So what Chinese government is doing is not there. Yes, they're saying, well, here's the things you shouldn't do, but on a selective basis, still things are getting done. Tencent put 10% into a Skydance. That's an equity deal, right? So selectively, you can do it for the right deal.
May I say one thing with that?
Yes, always.
There's a number of companies who are capitalized offshore, and it's a lot easier for them to make investments because it's a different approval process or a lack of an approval process.
Correct.
So I think there's a lot of great companies who want to continue investing, and I think in the long term will, but they don't really want to go ask for approval today.
Correct. But can I say something on top of that?
Yes, it's your, I
Yeah,
took
absolutely.
your time.
The reason those companies have asset and money offshore is because they had a global strategy from a long time ago.
Exactly.
That's why they can do it.
All right,
That's why they should be doing it.
I want to get Gao-Chen into this conversation. You're operating on both sides of the Pacific. What's your thought about the Hollywood-China relationship today?
Well, I tend to agree mostly both what Bennett and Chen Rong said. I think it's just, everything happens so fast, and if you look at the past 3-5 years, there are quite a number of slate deals. I know Universal has a great deal. There's a couple of other big guys doing deals with Hollywood. Unfortunately, we probably because everything happens so fast, we tend to be more too aggressive. People have funds offshore, but people does not really have funds offshore, trying to raise funds and find a way, try to move money out and do become over aggressive in terms of acquisition and deals. That's why you see we are a little bit policy-driven market. That's why it's more in a sense, more responsive. New policies coming out. That's why they block a number of deals. You guys already know. then when parts comes out, they cannot. It is one deal. They cannot tell about. Can't distinguish between the specifics. Some deal might be interesting, but when they issue a new policy, everything's blocked. Unfortunately, you say more Chinese moving money out, and basically there's a restriction about further acquisitions, about entertainment assets, cinema chains, for cause, other entertainment businesses, everything is blocked. In all of a sudden, give opportunity people won't have access overseas, much easier for them to continue to deal. But strategically, that's the first position to take. That's very important. I think over look at long term, it's interesting. People were already talking about we are the 5-year expiry about the deal in terms of total number of movies we can import. People were already talking about right now 34. We're trying to raise the number to 100. Somehow it's delayed in today's market. Some noise because of U.S. China trade war. But I think since those things will gone, take some time. I think we're still looking for positive going forward. Maybe when the trade war is over, I think the first thing studios will benefit. The entertainment industry will benefit. I think people were talking about the reasonable number of total imports to Chinese market.
And we note that although the quota number has remained at 34, and the hoped for increase was sort of a casualty at the moment of the trade battles. When China wants to import more than 34 films, they do, as they did last year when a bunch of films came in at the end as cultural exchange projects. They weren't officially part of the 34, but de facto, China lifted the quota to allow more U.S. films in. One of the things that I think is interesting is, and I want to sort of get to the difference between the macro picture, Washington and Beijing, and the micro, if you will, picture, which is the actual operations in the entertainment industry, folks sitting up here. Obviously, the news is bad if you listen to it on television or read it on websites. The presidents are not getting along well. The national governments are not getting along well. But China seems to have been very strategic in how it's responded in not going after the entertainment industry. The Chinese government seems to have taken most of its action relative to industries that matter in red states, as we call them here, or purple states, states that President Trump will care more about, and hasn't seemingly affected the entertainment industry.
You just insult my tie?
How
you
is
said
that?
Purple, it's like I wasn't wearing it as a political statement, but...
No, Bennett, I didn't insult your tie, but now that I notice you're the only one on stage wearing a tie, let's spend a few minutes talking about Bennett's tie. No, I do want to get a sense of macro versus micro. So let me turn, Alexis, to you for a second. The relationship up at the national level is not good right now. Do you see that frost extending to the entertainment industry, or are the two entertainment industries kind of operating warily in a business-as-usual way? I
think it extends into the industry as far as it being unpredictable, right? So you can't... And I'll give you a specific example, but being able to look and say, okay, we have a movie that we want to import into China 6 months from now. What is that relationship? What is that market going to look like? What is that process going to look like? And that can create uncertainty, and then that uncertainty can sometimes, in case of the example I'm about to give, lead to an opportunity. So I can't say the title, but I'm in the middle of I've actually closed a deal on behalf of a filmmaker for a studio film, so it's being distributed by a studio worldwide. Except in China, they were candid in saying, look, we're going to have all our eggs accounted for in terms of our big movies that we need to get into China, and we don't know how many we're going to be able to get in, and we're going to give you the rights back so that you can take it on your own and try to get it in yourself. And that's something that I think is very unique. I think if it's successful, it'll set a precedent, and a healthy precedent. They're not going to do it for every filmmaker. They're not going to do it every time they think it's going to be difficult to get a film. But if we can show that we were able to do that, and that then inured to the benefit of the filmmaker, and allowed a filmmaker to enter the market and spend more resources and energy doing that than perhaps a studio would have done. And we won't always know how hard they try on a movie or how much they're trying on one versus others. So at a minimum, even if it doesn't get in, we're able to give assurances that and transparency about how hard we tried and what the feedback was and why it didn't get in. And if that filmmaker is particularly motivated to get into China and be in that market, they can learn from that really specific feedback and factor that into their next film. And that way they are really entering the market themselves as opposed to relying on a studio multi-picture relationship.
So you raised an interesting issue about the uncertainty that you're facing. I mean, having spent my entire career in this business, to me, the entertainment industry is one of the most uncertain industries in the world. We put out, Procter & Gamble puts out products, and they know roughly how they're going to do. The entertainment industry is a master of uncertainty. How much, and I'm turning now to John, how much additional uncertainty does the China-Hollywood relationship create, and how does it affect what you do?
So, for sure, 6 months from now, it's impossible to look into the future and tell it and have a sense of what's happening. For us, the way we capitalize on it, we try to be as versatile as possible. Right now, we're also I can't announce what it is, but very shortly, you'll see we are to help with the currency issue with a Chinese company who wants to buy content outside of China. We are providing that capital and taking the view that because we're doing so much work in China, it's okay for us to have money in RMB. And so for us, that was an opportunity. We wouldn't have gotten our hands on these particular films that we think are going to work really well in China. They're not U.S. films, but they're going to work very well in China. But it would have been trickier for us to, if they had the ability to finance outside the country, they would have taken it. So for us, it was a great opportunity. So that uncertainty allows us, as long as we're willing to move fast and we're willing to, kind of keep our nose to what these problems, or at least these challenges as they present themselves, may be. We're smaller companies, so we can take advantage of it. And so I don't look at that, the variability of the state of potentially the industry in China as necessarily a negative thing, but you do have to move very quickly to take advantage of it.
So advantage to the nimble.
Yeah, and smaller, nimble, and little, we don't get that held up by, there's a contract, we got to figure it out, or there's a U.S. industry norm that you have to rely on. You'll just be stopped. I mean, we do a lot of local language productions around the world, and the biggest thing we learned, because we learned it from doing it the wrong way, going in with our contract and our acquisition agreement, and or the need to have a bond in some instances, which doesn't exist in many places, as Bennett will tell you. And we just had to get beyond that, and we got beyond it because we screwed up a few deals, and because we were standing on ceremony that this is how we do it, and we lost the deals. And these films or these particular projects did terrifically, and we're like, well, they're not going to change, so we better. And we adjusted a lot of how we run our business affairs based on the practical realities of wanting to be in these markets, including China.
And I think that's an example of how the Hollywood-China relationship has come together. In the early years, there was a lot of talk and very little action, in part because, China is a nation state and has its way of doing business, and I sometimes say Hollywood is a nation state of mind and has its own way of doing business, and nobody wanted to do business the other one's way. And So very little business was done. And as the cultures have become closer together, understood each other better, more has gotten done. But you got to be nimble, as John says. Now, the idea of a nimble bank is almost something of an oxymoron. People don't think of banks as being nimble. How do you operate in a way nimble enough to make these deals work?
I'm probably not that bright. I think there was a problem. I had no idea. I think Alexis and John actually, I think, touched on two really interesting points that tie back into, I think, the climate in China today. We have clients who are making local production offshore. And you would think that of all the things that you can go to SAFE to talk about to get an easy yes, they don't even want to go near it. And so it creates opportunity that John was talking about. Alexis and Rong are also, their companies are part of a joint venture that's able to participate in terrific local Chinese programming that's shooting offshore because they need a partner who can add that value. So I think that's an opportunity right now. The second thing is also what Alexis was talking about in terms of importing movies into China. I see my good pal Mike Ellis there. I just wish that one of these days we actually get Mike on this panel so we can kind of talk more about it, but he always pretends to say yes and then changes his mind a little bit about that. But I am a complete contrarian and maybe naive, but I think if you had 20 imported movies or 40 imported movies, I think the gross total is about the same at the box office. I think after a certain point of English language studio American movies going into the marketplace, I don't think it changes the gross box office. I could be wrong. I could be. You don't have to answer that. But what I am predicting is we're going to see a lot more imported films in 2019. A lot of our clients right now in China, in terms of the aftermath of the, I don't know what you want to call it, but the aftermath this summer in terms of being a celebrity, there's productions that have been stopped saying, well, we can't do the tax credit, so the economics are off, let's not do it. Or you have to go back and rethink the formula in terms of what you're paying talent. Right. Some talent's like, you know what? I don't want to be in a movie today. You know, I'm going to take a little break. And maybe I shouldn't say this publicly. I don't know if that's good or bad. But what I believe is that we'll see a lot more imported movies into China in 2019.
And that, okay, so let's focus on that. And I'm going to turn to this side of our panel. So Bennett is basically saying, as I understand it, you'll correct me if I'm wrong.
He's wrong.
Oh, my God. So Mike, next year we're going to do a trade. This is going to be even, no players named later, no draft picks. You know, Bennett's going to be down there with his purple tie, and you're going to be up here and telling us what's going on. All right, but you've postulated a very interesting theory. As a result of, I mean, let's not beat around the bush. We know what happened at a macro level with Fan Bingbing. We know the greater tax scrutiny. We know the regulations about how much you can pay people in proportion. And that's what you're talking about. And I understand the suggestion is that will have the effect of reducing the domestic Chinese output of content. That's the theory, thereby requiring the government essentially to bring in more imported films to keep the box office growing because they want to see that growth.
Supposed to be a secret? That nobody here will share my stupid theory, you know? So.
There it is. Okay, so Gao Chan, what's your thought? Do you see domestic Chinese production going down?
Well, it's going down last year because of this celebrity issue. What I heard is a lot of TV drama series. The Hengdian used to be full of people for projects. Right now, you look at total numbers of the projects and the production right now, the numbers definitely declined. That's not necessarily give the chance for import movies, maybe for movies, but if we look at different contents, TV drama series, for example, if you know, there's new, updated regulations about to try to limit the total number of TV series, other form of contents that can be broadcast at prime time over the Chinese network or the online streaming service platform. Try to limit it to 30% of whatever you can. It's basically the imported content should be 30%, maximum 30% of total content available, either through the networks or through the online. Now, this is updated regulation. It's not new. The regulation is back in 2004. The only update used to be only restriction on TV drama series, but now applies to all different contents like documentary, children's program, other things. But that is for primary time, basically 19 to 22, the evening time for TV drama series. Not necessarily a chance for imports, but this is for drama series. Maybe for TV, as we mentioned, they still try to regulate total box office on an annual basis, so that's a good chance. There's some flexibility. They try to adjust, even with now the quota was trying to do some minor adjustment in terms of total numbers that can import. So even though some down in terms of local production, does not necessarily give you the chance for imports right now.
Rong, do you want to weigh in on the Bennett theory?
Yes, thank you. I think for us, there are two things I think that's important. One is to have the ability, or at least try to have the ability to look into the future and see trends before it comes in front of us. I think Bennett talked about what we saw as what's coming in terms of equity market, not just our industry overall, many months ago. The day iQIYI went public in U.S., I have a WeChat, what we call moment. I actually said the days of just selling very high on TV websites, very high price just because you have a star or just because you have an IP, the day started counting down today. We see that coming. We see the tax problem coming. We see a lot of issues coming. Part of the reason I came over to the U.S. to start our overseas business when everybody is still focused on China as a growing market, which we still do, is because we want to diversify. So really, to look into the future, to spot strategic shift underlying the market, I think it's important for us. And short term, partner with people who are nimble, like East West Bank. When we did the Universal deal, by the way, the Universal deal, even though we did it in 2015-16 for hundreds of millions of dollars, we started looking to film slate financing back as early as 2010. So talking about speed bumps and all that, we didn't just decide it on that year. We looked into it in 2010. We looked at Dune Capital. We looked at Legendary. We looked at Village Roadshow back in 2010. We decided it wasn't the right time for us to do it back then. So that's what, 8 years ago? But once you are in an uncertain market, which this market always is, staying with nimble partner is important. And when we did the Universal deal, there's a very large bank that asked me, hey, Ron, if we can rewind the clock, would you let us be the leading bank of that deal? And I said, no, because you're just not nimble, and you will never be as nimble as you can be compared to East West. That's just the way it is.
That's so sweet. But his iQIYI post was in Chinese, and I did the Google Translate, and I got something completely different than what you said.
Right.
But I love you.
Fortunately, he came up with buy Amazon, and it turned out to be a great strategy. So, okay.
Can I have one thing on there?
Yeah, I was going to turn to you on the other partnership, but go ahead.
Oh, sure, we can do that too. Hopefully the net effect of this correction that we're talking about with talent deals in China, sure, it might be that there's less quantity of movies, but hopefully what then there becomes is the quality goes up, right? As it becomes, to Ron's point, people slow down and say, okay, if we want to compete for this talent, it's not just about offering them a certain amount of money, grabbing that slot, and then racing to make a movie in that slot, which is how it's been in both the TV drama and the movie business for a while now. And it'll be about, do we have IP or hopefully even a script that is strong enough to be able to lure that talent with more of a ceiling on what the talent can be paid. So now you're competing on a creative basis as well, which then, and creative basis and partner basis. So who are your producing partners? Who are your distribution partners? Who's handling the marketing? That starts to look like what the business looks like here in a very mature phase where movie star may have plenty of choices for the same amount of money. They may even take less money because they believe a particular film is going to work well or do something for their career in that moment. And so as that starts to enter the China market, then hopefully the quality of those projects can go up, and even if the number of films went down, box office will continue to grow.
I do want to stay with you for one sec. We talk about partnerships, and two of you up here have companies with an unusual partnership. Right? Perfect Village is a partnership of the perfect is Perfect World. The Village is Village Roadshow.
We're silent.
And
well, there's an E on the end of that, right?
For many of us, there's an E on the end of it, and that E is Endeavor. So if you would speak to that for just a moment, what's the theory of that partnership, and how does that play into a future-looking China-Hollywood strategy?
Well, even predating that partnership, our China operation itself, so our China office, as it is a joint venture as well, and so that's a partnership, primarily with financial partners, but local ones, Sequoia Capital and Fountain Vest, but Tencent is a partner in that venture as well. So everything we do in China, we are doing with partners, and we rely on those partners for expertise and guidance and to play roles that we do not believe we are as capable of playing, even with local executives, and we have local executives in our China office as well. But even with local executives, because the ultimate guidance we're providing is based off of our knowledge of the Hollywood film business, or the Hollywood, or other, obviously plenty of other businesses there as well. But our knowledge of U.S. and international markets that are just not the same as the China market. So in all those instances, we have a relationship with partners to help us kind of catch up to what we should be doing.
Rong, do you want to comment on it? You're good with the explanation. All right, in about 2-3 minutes, we're going to open this up to questions. But I want to do a quick future-looking segment. We do this every year. The kind thing we do is we never come back a year later and play the tape of what people said the year before. So in that sense, there's no accountability, and it allows you to think and speak freely. Gao Chun, I want to start with you. Look a year ahead into the future. Where do you see the China-Hollywood relationship when we gather together here next year?
Well, I think mostly we're turning much better compared to stages today. There's a lot of noise today. I think, as mentioned, the quotas will be lifted. I think we'll see more movies being put in the Chinese market. Perfect was involved with slate financing. Starlight was trying to do a little more than get involved in further development stage. Alexis helped us facilitate a couple of deals. We signed some talents for the development stage. Hopefully, Cypher will have more ownership. I think it's a different way we can work out rather than co-financing a project with Hollywood. We want to be more involved in the development process. Hopefully, we can play more active roles.
Great. Ron?
So we actually have two operating entities here in U.S. One is called Perfect Universe Investment that managed the $500 million deal with Universal. The other one is Perfect World Pictures USA, which is here to develop, produce, finance content. So there are two businesses we're doing. We're really doing the second piece of business, the active business, right after our Universal deal, which actually, put us over here in terms of presence and credibility and all that. So it's kind of a two-staged strategy over there. A year from now, I think, like I said, I really think things are getting healthier, almost all the way around, both in China as well as the cross-border relationship. There are things we need to be careful when we execute, but I think overall, I really am optimistic things are going to get better year after year. In terms of the quota, one thing, before we got into the business in China, we actually looked at many markets around the world. One of them we looked close at is the Korean market, Korean film market. And over there, you would notice over the years, the government had regulation tighter, and then let it go, and tighter and let it go. That in itself actually helped the domestic market or domestic filmmakers to become stronger in terms of competition. You don't just open it up and they get killed because of the competition. You don't just totally close it so they feel like there's no competition. So that is not a bad thing. So there's different ways to do it, but I don't think the quota in itself is necessarily something you just want to get rid of. I think for the overall long-term health, modulation is good.
So it may look a little blue or a little red, or it may look a little purple. So let's turn to the man in the purple tie. Bennett, where do you see things a year from now?
That could be a new show.
The man in the purple tie?
I think so. I like it. I like it.
We got 4 competitors up here already working on it. So.
I'm going to bring you guys ties for next year. I think that's what we have to work on. I think something that also I think Alexis also mentioned earlier in terms of, or maybe it was John, I forget, but the quality of movies in China just keeps getting better and better and better. And Chen and I were involved in a movie a couple years ago called Skip Trace. And that year, I think it was 2016, it was one of the leading box office movies in China, but it probably shouldn't have been. And when I look in the last 2 years and look at the local comedies or the action movies that are just driving the box office, or we talked in our panel last week about Dying to Survive, there's some incredible local movies that have kind of broken through out of the shadow of the master directors, right? And so I think that's a trend we'll see continuing. What I'm most curious, and something that Gao talked about earlier, is most of our local business is in financing satellite TV dramas. That is not an acceptable market for imports as movies are. So I'm curious to see how that trend develops over the next 12 months if there is a shortage in product for that. That's the other thing. I think that some companies who are publicly traded in China are going to have a tough time getting through the capital market conditions and trying to recapitalize, reformulate their balance sheets. They might need assistance either from the Alibabas or Tencents of the world, or maybe for the government, or maybe some of them don't survive. I think that's probably the scary thing over there. But I think, last but not least, in terms of the people on the ground doing China Hollywood are, in my years of experience, probably the most fun I've ever had, the best quality of people I've ever worked with on both sides.
Well, I agree with you there. It's been a great privilege to be part of that. So, Alexis, 1 year in the future, when you come back next year, what are we going to be seeing?
So I'll pick up a little bit on something Bennett touched on. So I think we'll look back and say it was a year where the dam broke open in a couple different ways. One, because of Dying to Survive, right? I don't think that can be magnified enough just because to have a box office champion of that quality level in China, who I think will inspire a lot of other creators and filmmakers in China, and I think it will also lead to more, this is one of the other predictions, more Hollywood crossing over into local market, whether it's providing IP, screenwriting, actors appearing in some Chinese, primarily kind of local content. And then because of Crazy Rich Asians being the other kind of contributor to the dam breaking open, I think we'll see, even a year from now, a lot more content being made, not necessarily for China, and that movie wasn't made for China, right? But international content, American content, and other local content with more opportunities for Asian and Asian American actors, which will then, I think, lead to more crossover opportunities for Chinese actors in Hollywood content, just as more kind of roles start to be written that are colorblind or even for Asian actors.
Great. And John, a year from now, will there be more crazy rich Asians in Hollywood?
Well, there will definitely be two more. We will do those. I think maybe a little bit of wishful thinking, but I'm hoping a year from now, deals like Alexis alluded to, where financiers are holding Chinese rights because they're best equipped to handle that market outside of the studio system. Not that the studios don't do a good job with it, but it's competition. There's just the reality that, I don't know what film you're speaking of, but you're always going to take better care of that and that opportunity potentially than a studio who are competing for their tentpole pictures to get into the market. So I hope that trend continues. The Meg did it terrifically, where, as I understand it, I don't know if you were involved in that deal, but China was off the table already. And as a financier and a producer, I love that model because we'll be best with partners like Starlight, who could help us in China, who's a real advantage for us. So a year into the future, I hope more of those creative deals are struck, where going in, it's not just we'll deal with it down the line and figure it out. No. Figure it out now, hold the value of that. That would be a terrific thing.
So we're going to open it up to questions. It's a little hard to see with the bright light, so that makes it a little easier. Raise your hand, and if there are microphones in the room, let's bring them up, and if not, I'll repeat the question. Please, go ahead.
Okay, I'm wondering, Julia Perpont, I'm a film producer, director, also working with the agency. So I'm very curious for the four who are really involved in production. I'd love to hear more about how you see the content and the genre stacking up over the next year.
So for those who couldn't hear, how will the content and genre choices change and develop over the next year? Who wants to jump in on that?
Can I clarify genre for the Chinese film or for co-production for?
Co-production, so thriller, action, dramas, comedies, families. What do you think is going to be interesting?
Wrong?
I mean, come on, even the studio heads get this wrong all the time. Well, I think you can see the trends of what's been working, quite well. The number one movie the last few weeks before the imports came in is Project Gutenberg, which is a Hong Kong thriller. You can see Operation Red Sea Wolf Warriors. On the comedy side, anything by Mahua Fun Age, except for the very last one they did, didn't really work out as well. Family animation's always kind of huge. Gentlemen?
Yeah, I was just going to say something like the Meg, again, to use a recent example, that had significance for Chinese audiences. So while it was not necessarily something you think of like, wow, could we get this action adventure film in there? In fact, if you look back at its history, as the book developed and had been under option for quite some time, it works in both markets. So I think whatever the genre is, that's a little beside the point outside of potential censorship issues. But it's more, are there relevant, organic, character-driven reasons for that genre to exist in that market?
All right. We have another, I see over here, and then there's a hand up on this side.
Everybody seems to say it's impossible to get money out of China. Why not go to China and do local productions of either English language or crossover films there?
Who wants to jump
Bennett.
on that one? Bennett, you want to take that one?
I think he answered his own question. I think that was a very, very brilliant and very astute remark. Well, yeah, I think that the Perfect Village is a good example of that. I think with John's strategy is a perfect example of that. I think the studios have quietly been investing in local content a lot. I think what the real question, flipping that over, is how to get local content to travel, beyond China in a bigger way. I mean, that's really, to me, I think one of the number one goals of whatever SARFT is called now.
But he was saying something slightly, because you were saying making English language movies in China?
Well,
Yeah.
that's
So
I
Skip
think
Trace, so Skip Trace.
script is done in Chinese. Actually, we have a choice whether we want to go English or have done. We have done version that makes commercially successful, especially for what we call third, fourth tier market. People still prefer to watch Chinese language contents. So that's one of the challenges. I think what I forget which we mentioned. Co-production in terms of get the foreign partner involved in terms of production, post-production, and even actually a lot of Chinese production trying to shoot outside overseas. Just give a little more sense. People want to maybe for Chinese people living outside the country. So I think for partners more involved in the production process, but for local Chinese language contents, one of the challenges still is minimum market potential there today.
All right, we had there was a hand up. Young lady had a hand up over here in the middle.
Hello, this question is for Mr. Chen Rong. I guess it's very hard to reach a deal to do slate financing or to establish a joint venture, but it is even harder to do the daily operations afterwards. Because we've seen several cases, either a joint venture is shut down or one partner acquired the shares from the other partner. So I want to ask, what is your lessons or advice in regards of operating a joint venture? Thank you.
Okay. Like I said, back in 2010, we already looked into this business model, which is why when the first one-page term sheet was given to us back in 2015, it was almost a no-brainer for the entire executive committee to say, do it. And the reason for that is because we know this is the right partner. So number one answer to your question is to be with the right partner. That makes everything else easier. And second is, when you decide to go with it, the contract stage and all the discussions follows in the next X months is what we call the rules of engagement. That need to be defined well, and that need to be defined in a constructive way. Once you do the first two steps right, then it's just the people who execute, and I think that's actually the easier one than the first two.
These are really good questions.
Really
I have a question for you.
Uh-oh.
Because you've been asking all the questions today.
Yeah.
What is your thought? What does your crystal ball say for 2019?
Oh, you're getting me on record.
Yeah,
huh?
I'm getting you on record.
I actually am an optimist. I'm probably an optimist by nature. And I recognize that our industry is not immune, and if things really go south in a bad way between the United States and China, which we hope and pray they won't, we won't be immune from that. But I'm more optimistic than that. I think cooler heads will prevail up at the international level, so to speak. And I think that the industries on both sides of the Pacific will mature as deal makers and partners, and they grow more sophisticated in terms of making product that can travel on a global basis. I mean, there was no secret when this relationship started. Hollywood was in it largely for two things: money from China, and second, and Hollywood's always looking for money, and second, the world's largest entertainment market. That's what Hollywood was in it for. It was no secret. China had somewhat more subtle reasons, I think, for being involved. And obviously there was an opportunity to make money. There was an opportunity to develop the film industry. The State Council, I think back in 2008, said over the next 8 to 10 years, GDP from leisure and entertainment industries in China would go from 2.5% to 10% of GDP, which was an incredible gamble, if you will. against a rising GDP. But clearly the government wanted to have that sector grow, and I think part of it is the soft power that China sees in what the United States has been able to export culturally. For Chinese companies, it was an opportunity to go global, to understand the global entertainment industry at the place where it sort of started. And those reasons remain every bit as compelling today as they were when the relationship began. Hollywood still needs money, not a news item. Hollywood still looks for markets, not a news item. And Chinese companies doing business here have grown incredibly more sophisticated. They are smart. They are, for the most part, very disciplined. And both sides, I think, have gotten a great deal out of the relationship. So it's going to continue, and it's going to grow. That's my bullish comment. And unfortunately, for whoever had their hand up, we're now out of time. I don't think anybody here, well, with one exception I know of, is running out. So we will allow the next panel to move forward, but we'll stay around and be willing to talk. Thank you all for being a great audience. Thank you.